So, this is a video that was recorded almost a full year ago. Now, YouTube allows me to set these things to show up at some set time in the future, and I do that so I can read 2 or 3 chapters of a book, and if I have to miss a day, I miss a day. Well, I'm pushing this ahead a full year to remind you of what we just finished. You and I and Lolly and your mommy and daddy just had a big vacation. We drove out to Omaha to see you. Your mommy and daddy and you and we went up and we drove a long, long way. We drove into Minnesota, which was a state you hadn't been in before, and a state your Lolly had only seen by an airport. And then after Minnesota, we went into South Dakota, and North Dakota, and Montana, and Idaho, and Utah, and Nevada, and California, and Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, I already said Idaho, Colorado, and then back home, which is a long, long trip. And then your Lolly and I did a couple of other little trips on our way back home because, you know, we're a long way from you. Anyway, some of the things that we saw. We saw the Badlands. Now, the Badlands is an area where millions of years ago, sedimentary rock was laid down. So it was like dirt piling on top of dirt, piling on top of dirt, and all of this took place underwater. So you'd have layers of sand being deposited, just like at a beach, where a mountain crumbles and the sand gets deposited in a flood. And this happened years and years and years, and it built up. And then the land rose and dried. And then water came and carved it out. So what you have is you have all of these beautiful lands where you have the tall mountains and these gorgeous valleys where the rock has been cut away by water. And so you could see the land, the lines where the sand built up, and different types of rock eroded to build up the sand. And we got this postcard there, and on the back you drew a picture, and Lolly wrote some of the things that happened. And inside of the Badlands there's a park called Mount Rushmore. And Mount Rushmore is the head of has the head of 4 presidents carved in rock. So you have Washington, you have Jefferson, you have Lincoln, and you have Teddy Roosevelt, and their faces are carved into the rock. Now, these presidents were chosen because they were kind of heroes of the sculptor who carved the mountain. Washington, of course, was the first president, the father of the country. Lincoln freed the slaves. Thomas Jefferson did something called the Louisiana Purchase. See, France was hurting for money in the beginning of the 19th century, that's the early 1800s, because Napoleon needed money. But he had a whole bunch of land that he couldn't do anything with. So Thomas Jefferson and Napoleon got together and said, okay, I'll give you gold if you give me land. And Napoleon was happy with this, and Jefferson was happy with this. So the United States essentially doubled in size with one quick purchase of land. And the final president was Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Teddy Roosevelt was president in the early 1900s, and he started the national park system. So he was responsible for the existence of national parks, which is why he was chosen. We also saw a monument called Crazy Horse. Now, Crazy Horse was a great Native American leader, and the person who carved Mount Rushmore took another mountain and started carving Crazy Horse in it. But this Crazy Horse statue is so big, it will be, when it is finished, it will be the world's largest statue. And there's a picture of the guy from here up, And the heads on it are even bigger than the head on Crazy Horse is even bigger than the head on Mount Rushmore. I mean, this thing is just absolutely massive. And so Crazy Horse was one of the great Native American leaders, and he is being memorialized in this mountain. And you actually have a piece of this mountain, which is being cut apart into a statue, with you. Your mom and dad, I picked it up for you. I gave it to your mom and dad, and they're carrying it along. Also, on this trip, you met cousins. All sorts of cousins of mine. You met Beatrix, and you met Veronica, and you met Heidi, and you met Rex. And Veronica was a good help taking care of you. Veronica's smart. They're all smart, actually. I mean, they're all like crazy smart. But Veronica was a huge help and very friendly, and you got along great with her. I have a whole bunch of pictures of you and her together. So you saw Mount Rushmore with them. We went out to dinner, and you ate with them, and you got a fireman hat, because the restaurant where we ate at gave all the kids little plastic fireman hats, and you actually have 2 of them, and I think one of them is actually supposed to be Veronica's, but she didn't want to take it, so I just stacked the 2 on top and gave them both to you. So that was the Badlands. That was Mount Rushmore. Also, near the Badlands in Wyoming, we saw something called Devil's Tower. Now, Devil's Tower is a giant thing. It looks like a giant tree stump, except it's all rock. It's hundreds of feet high, and it's kind of out in the middle of nothingness, where it's like, you drive along and you see this thing. It's just sticking up out of flat grass. And that's a different type of rock. I told you how the Badlands were mostly sedimentary. Well, this is a type of rock called igneous, and igneous comes from the Greek word for fire. Igneo something. I'm not entirely sure on my Greek roots, but anyway, it comes from the Greek word for fire, and it's a type of volcanic rock. So, Devil's Tower was formed when this volcanic rock melted its way up through the layers and layers of sedimentary rock. And because the sedimentary rock is just sort of like clumps of little pebbles stuck together, and clumps of little sand stuck together, and clumps of little dust stuck together, it erodes away very easily. While the igneous rock makes up Devil's Tower is one solid piece of rock. Well, sort of solid piece of rock, but it's large crystals of rock, so it doesn't melt away easily. It doesn't erode away. So it was left standing there in the middle of this nothingness in the Badlands. And after that, also in the Badlands, Waldrug. Now, Waldrug is cool. Waldrug is a place that's what is referred to as a tourist trap. And it's a place that exists, it's a place that you go to see just to go to see it. There are a few of these type of things scattered all over the place, and Waldrug is one of them. And I mean, it's really kind of cool, and there's odd, fun things to see there. And we have lots of pictures of you riding on a buffalo and a wagon, and pictures of you, and the dinosaur. You were so scared of that dinosaur, even though it was all behind a wall and it was all fake. But, it was loud and it was noisy, and I can see why it scared you, because you were only little at the time, and now you're bigger. So, Waldrug Tourist Trap is one of the more famous ones. Now, it's interesting because they're billboards for Waldrug all the way back in Chicago. So imagine seeing a sign to go see Waldrug 1,000 miles before you even get there. About 1,000 miles before you even get there. Waldrug is one of the famous ones. South of the border is another famous one. That's in South Carolina. And your Lolly and I talked, it's like, wouldn't it be fun to go from Waldrug to south of the border? Because there's kind of some jokes between the two of them, and they all have these billboards that, South of the border, I mean, you start seeing billboards for that almost in Maine, and it's down in South Carolina. And so it's just like, oh, Wall Drug, 900 miles ahead, or south of the border, 600 miles ahead. It's like, really? So it'd be fun to go from one to the other. But South Carolina is definitely not on the way to or from California, Mount Rushmore, Idaho. So those are the things that we saw in the Badlands. Then we went down into Utah. And in Utah, we saw the historic Saltair Resort. Now, that is a resort that is up on the Great Salt Lake. And I've told you things about the Great Salt Lake while we were there. And essentially what it is it's a bowl between mountains. So you have all these mountains surrounding Salt Lake City and the Great Salt Lake. And it flows down into this sort of valley. But the thing is because the mountains go all the way around like a halo, there's no way for the water to get out. So what happens is it rains in the mountains, and the rain erodes rock, and the rain melts away salt, because there's salt mixed in with all of the rock, because that's just how it goes, because salt is everywhere. And anyway, so little bits of salt get carried away. And as they get carried away, they go into the water. And the water piles up in the basin, but there's nowhere for the water to go, because there is no hole at the bottom of the basin. So what happens is it evaporates. So if you were to take a cup of water, take like a paper cup of water and mark the side of it where the water is, and you just set it out, the water level will slowly drop over time. And so when I go to work, if I leave coffee in my coffee cup at work, the coffee level drops. And because coffee is a dark liquid, you can clearly see these lines of zzz. That's where the coffee level was, and then now it's lower without anyone drinking it, I hope. Anyway, so the water level drops. But what happens is all the salt gets left behind, because the water can evaporate, but the salt can't. So you have the water level, just the water dropping, and the salt staying there. And depending on how much rain you get, the lake gets bigger or smaller, because if it rains more than it evaporates, then the lake gets bigger. If it evaporates more than it rains, then the lake gets smaller. Now, when I was a kid out visiting Salt Lake City a bazillion years ago, there were floods, and the Saltair Resort was like underwater, or the base of it was underwater. Now it's hundreds of feet, almost a mile from the Saltair Resort, which was built right on the lake, to the actual surface of the lake. So this is one of those things that just changes and changes. Another fun thing we saw in Utah was we saw the Golden Spike. Now, the Golden Spike is a spike that was driven into the railroad tracks when the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads came together. And this happened in the late 1800s, and they built these two train tracks going right to each other, and the idea was that they would meet in the middle. And so there was a race on, because the two train companies were paid by how much track they laid. So there was a motivation to lay as much track as fast as possible. So it was a race to get to a middle point. But you never knew where the middle point was going to be, because if this guy went faster, then the middle point was going to be over here. If this one went faster, then the middle point was going to be there. And it ended up in a place called Promontory Point, Utah. So that was kind of cool to see. And you loved the train. There was this train, his big engine, smoke and steam, and it was just all sorts of awesome. Then after that, we went to Vegas. I don't have a picture of Vegas, but we stayed at a hotel called the Excalibur. Now, Excalibur is the name of King Arthur's sword. So, King Arthur, King of England, 600 AD-ish. He's kind of not entirely sure when he was, but Anyway, King Arthur, King of the Britons, drove out the Romans, maybe. Was a Roman, maybe. Had a sword, yes. Sword was called Excalibur, yes. Various legends around the sword because the sword was really, really cool. Anyway, the hotel was named after the sword. And it was themed with castles. The whole thing was a castle. So there's this big castle up front. And Lolly and my room overlooked the castle. And you stayed with us in our room. And you looked out at the castle and you're like, oh, that's so pretty. And your mom and dad got you a princess dress there. And you wore that princess dress all over the place. And it was and everybody loved the princess dress. I mean, there was a little girl who walked up to you and said, I like your dress. And we told you to say thank you, and you said thank you. And you're getting better with saying thank you when people say nice things to you. And, you know, at first you didn't know what to do, but now you know you're saying it, and even now better. Sure, you're getting better at this. And then on one of the days, your mom and dad were exploring Las Vegas, and your Lolly and I took you to Death Valley. Now, we didn't see this rock. Now, this rock is kind of cool. But Death Valley is cool all in itself. It's called Death Valley because things die there. But it is hot. Really, really stinking hot. So, you think it's hot if it's 90, 95. This was 120 degrees. And it was just so hot there. We have pictures of you standing by the thermometer at 120 degrees. Now, Death Valley is so hot because it's low. Death Valley is a basin just like Great Salt Lake, except instead of just going down to a few thousand feet above sea level, Death Valley actually goes down below sea level. So, if you're to take a pipe and connect it to the ocean and put the other end in Death Valley, the ocean would flood into Death Valley. Now, the Great Salt Lake, if you take a pipe from Great Salt Lake and put it into the ocean, Great Salt Lake will drain into the ocean. But Death Valley goes down so far that the ocean actually drains into it. So we saw Death Valley. And let's see, we saw... No, we didn't take you to see Hoover Dam. We took your dad to see Hoover Dam. And we took you to see... What did we take her to see? It wasn't Death Valley. It was... I'll remember it later. I'll come back to it. We'll do this out of sequence. Oh, yes. Oh, the Skywalk. That was so awesome. How did I forget the Skywalk? Okay, so we took you to see the Grand Canyon. So, when we took you to Death Valley, you got into California before your dad did. And then we took you into Arizona to see the Grand Canyon, and you got into Arizona before your dad did. Which, Anyway, so took you to the west rim of the Grand Canyon. Now, most people talk about the north rim and the south rim of the Grand Canyon because the Grand Canyon kind of runs east-west. But the western edge of the Grand Canyon is in the middle of a Native American reservation. So Native American reservations are these weird special things where the natives run the government of the location, and they don't really follow state laws, and they are somewhat exempt from federal laws, and so there's all sorts of weird things that can happen on native reservations. And some of them are really awesome, and some of them not so much. But this reservation, the people got together and they built the Skywalk. And what it is it's this glass walkway. So, big thick glass, but it's perfectly clear. This glass walkway where you can walk out over the canyon, and it's 1,000 feet straight down. So, you're walking along, and you know, there's a handrail, but if you look down, you can see 1,000 feet straight down. So, your mom and dad didn't want to do this, but your lolly wanted to do this, and I wanted to do this because, you know, it is just awesome walking out over nothingness. So we walked out onto the Skywalk, and we saw that, and that was just all shades of incredible. I mean, it was just incredible to look down and see that. And then we took you to an art exhibit. This was a busy day. We didn't get home until almost midnight that day. But we took you to an art exhibit that looked like a grocery store. And at the same time, it was like aliens and art. And there were all sorts of really cool video displays and fake books and fake products. And it was just insanely awesome. But you were a little small to get it, but you liked the bright lights and the noise and the... So that was kind of fun. After that, we went to California. Because, you know, let me tell you something. If you're driving to Vegas, you might as well drive to LA. And, you know, there are people who are going to be like, that's stupid. LA is so far from Las Vegas. It's like, no, it's only 3 hours, 2 hours. So we went into LA and we did a bus tour, which was cool. So we got on this bus and we drove around, and you loved the bus. You loved seeing the bus. You were like, bus, 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 bus. And you sang the wheels on the bus go round and round. So you rode the bus, and we rode the bus. And we saw all of these different famous sites in Hollywood, and we saw the Hollywood Hotel, and we saw Rodeo Drive, and we saw the Hollywood sign, the big Hollywood sign. And we saw it from a couple of different places. And we saw famous people's houses, and, you know, various beautiful houses, because, you know, if you have lots of money, you can buy beautiful things. And then we took you to the ocean, and you set foot in the Pacific Ocean. So, you know, you have now been to the Pacific Ocean. And that was the first time for your lolly. That was the first time for your dad and your mom. Oh, I guess your mom had been in the Pacific Ocean before. But that was the first time for your dad and your mom and you. Then after that, we went up to Colorado. And we stayed in a hotel with a movie theater. And this was so incredibly awesome. Because in the rooms, there are these big windows. And if you looked out the window, you saw the movie screen. And they had a little switch up on the wall, and you turn the little switch up on the wall, and you hear the movie, and you're watching the movie, and you're sitting in bed. Which, you know, was like, oh, well, I can watch TV, or I can watch a movie on my iPad while, you know, lying in bed. But this was different. This was like a big screen movie. It was, I don't know. I just thought that was awesome. And then after that, we went up through Colorado, and we saw the Great Sand Dunes. And the Great Sand Dunes is like a beach, except instead of surrounded by ocean, it's surrounded by mountains. And you like the Great Sand Dunes, and you love playing and splashing in the water, and your lolly was upset that you sat down in the water. But, you know, you sat down in the water, and, you know, it's like, I can't really stop you when you're halfway down. So, played in the water, you saw the sand dunes. And then after that, we went to see the Garden of the Gods, and you had a rocket ship steak quesadilla, which was kind of cool. And there was more of the rock formations where, you know, the water and the wind had eroded the rock. And then after that, we took you home. So that's what happened last year. Hopefully we'll have another similar adventure. Anyway, think of adventures that you want to have and let me know what these adventures are. Because maybe we can make some of them happen.